My name is Frank. And last night I ended up in the ER. This morning, I walked into the bank. And all of it started with one thing. I refused to co-sign a mortgage for my son. You might think family should always step in. New questions asked. But let me ask you, would you risk your entire future for a house that isn't yours? It happened at Sunday dinner. My wife Linda was moving between the kitchen and the table, keeping the meal together the way she always does. My son Mike sat beside his wife, Jessica. She isn't the type to wait her turn. She dropped a stack of glossy brochures right in the middle of the table, sending the gravy boat sliding to the edge. Her voice carried across the room. We found the one. It wasn't just a house. It was a $650,000 dream she was already decorating in her head. Mike looked at me with that wide grin of his, hoping I'd nod along. But Jessica went further. She said they only needed one thing to make it real. My signature. She asked for it like she was asking me to pass the salt. I told them no. And that's when the bone in my hand snapped. At the ER, a nurse slid a splint over my swollen finger, and the sharp pain finally settled into a dull throb. Linda sat beside me, her face pale, eyes darting between me and the doctor. Mike stood near the wall, guilt written all over him. But I barely looked his way. My mind wasn't on the accident anymore. It was on the line they had pushed me to cross. I've lived long enough to know what signing for someone else's debt can cost. Years ago, I co-signed for my own brother. And when he walked away, I was left cleaning up the wreckage. That mistake nearly bankrupted me. I swore to myself it would never happen again. Not for a friend. Not for a neighbor. And not even for my son. As the doctor wrapped fresh bandages, I stared at the crooked outline of my hand and felt the vow harden inside me. This broken finger wasn't just an accident. It was a warning. I would not give away my name, my credit, or my peace of mind for anyone's dream house. The next morning, Mike insisted on meeting me at the bank. He was restless, trying to prove that I had overreacted. Jessica trailed close behind, holding onto a folder of papers as if it were already a set of house keys. We sat across from Cheryl, the mortgage officer, whose polite smile never quite reached her eyes. Mike rattled off the numbers with forced confidence. $650,000 purchase price. 20% down. 30-year fixed. He spoke as if determination could bend the math in his favor. Cheryl entered the figures into her calculator, tapping at the keyboard with practiced speed. The screen refreshed. And there it was. The monthly payment wasn't close to what Mike and Jessica had expected. It was nearly double. My son leaned forward, blinking hard as if a second look might change the digits. Jessica clutched her folder tighter, her face draining of color. Cheryl began to explain calmly, listing property taxes, HOA fees, insurance, and maintenance. Each word landed like a nail in the coffin of their dream. I stayed quiet, watching Mike's jaw clench. He whispered that maybe the numbers could be adjusted. Cheryl pointed to a line marked projected income. She said if Mike could show higher earnings, the bank might stretch further. I saw the suggestion for what it was, an invitation to bend the truth. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the ache in my bandaged finger. This wasn't just about a house anymore. If they could twist the figures this easily, what else would they try to twist once my name was on the line? When we left the bank, Mike's silence weighed heavier than any words. He walked ahead, papers crumpled in his hand, while Jessica stayed close to her phone. As we reached the parking lot, a message flashed across Mike's screen, bright enough for me to catch a glimpse when he set it down on the counter later that evening. It was from Evan, the realtor. The text read like more than business. Private showing tonight. Don't forget the champagne. And it was addressed to Jessica. I said nothing, but the words clung to me like oil on water. They didn't wash away. Linda noticed the shift in my expression. She asked if something was wrong, but I brushed it aside, not ready to ignite a fire without proof. My bandaged finger throbbed again, as if it knew the line between family and betrayal had just grown darker. Jessica acted as though nothing was unusual, flipping through house brochures with the same glossy excitement, though her eyes darted nervously when Mike wasn't looking. I knew then that this dream home wasn't just about square footage or backyard fences. It carried secrets in its walls, the kind that rot from within. And if champagne was waiting at a private showing, it wasn't for celebrating numbers on a loan. It was for something else entirely. Later that week, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a stack of papers Mike had left behind. Bank statements, pay stubs, and a few crumpled receipts. I wasn't snooping. He had asked for my help. Though I doubt he expected me to dig this deep, I spread the pages out, my splinted finger awkward against the pen as I began circling numbers that didn't add up. The pattern revealed itself quickly. Jessica's spending stood out like neon signs. Designer furniture bought on credit. Luxury handbags delivered to the house. Charges from restaurants that didn't match the family dinners she'd described. Then came the hotel bills. Small boutique places tucked away on the edge of town. Billed on nights when she was supposedly working late. I compared the dates against the realtor's open house schedule I'd quietly noted. The overlap was too precise to dismiss. Nights Jessica claimed to be out, showing houses with Evan matched perfectly with the receipts for wine and hotel rooms. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paper trail. Money doesn't lie. It doesn't care about excuses or sweet talk. Every dollar leaves a footprint. And these footprints were marching Jessica straight into betrayal. I didn't need confrontation yet. I needed proof she couldn't twist. And the numbers were already speaking louder than her words ever could. I made an appointment with Cheryl under the guise of being interested in refinancing one of my shop properties. She welcomed me with that same practiced smile, her fingers already poised on the keyboard. I spoke carefully, as if I were just another customer trying to stretch my chances. I mentioned that my son's work was irregular, that his freelance gigs came in waves, and that the numbers didn't always look steady on paper. Cheryl leaned forward, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound like a favor. She said the bank could be flexible if Mike could provide projected income for the coming months. You know, she added, a letter from him, maybe some anticipated contracts. It doesn't all have to be verified yet. I let her talk, nodding slowly, though inside I felt the burn of confirmation. She wasn't asking for honesty. She was asking us to pad the story, to dress up weak numbers in borrowed clothes. It was exactly the kind of shortcut that had nearly destroyed me years ago. When she slid a sample form across the desk, I pressed the record button on my phone inside my jacket pocket. Her words, her tone, even the faint shuffle of the papers, all of it captured. By the time I left, I had more than a suggestion. I had evidence. And in this kind of game, evidence is the blade that cuts through every excuse. I reached out to Evan under a different name, using a separate email address tied to one of my shop's business accounts. I told him I was looking for something quick, something off the market, and I was ready to pay a finder's fee if the deal moved fast. His reply came almost immediately, slick and eager. He offered a late showing at one of the properties Jessica had been raving about. He called it a private open house, the kind that didn't need paperwork up front if the money looked right. When I arrived, I didn't walk in right away. I stayed back, watching through the glow of the entryway lights. Evan was already inside, pouring 2 glasses of wine. A few minutes later, Jessica stepped out of a rideshare and hurried in, her smile tight but her eyes alive with anticipation. They moved with a familiarity that didn't belong to a realtor and his client. His hand brushed hers as he passed the glass, and she didn't pull away. I lifted my phone, snapping photos. each one stamped with time and location. Then I let the camera roll long enough to capture their voices. Evan whispering about pushing the deal through and Jessica laughing in response. Proof doesn't need drama. It only needs clarity. And that night, clarity came in the form of images and sound that neither of them could deny. The next morning, I sat at my desk in the shop office with everything spread out like a case file. Cheryl's recorded suggestion about projected income. Evan's late-night whispers caught on video. Jessica's hotel receipts and credit card statements stacked neatly in a folder. Each piece by itself was suspicious. Together, they were undeniable. I drafted 3 identical packets, each one sealed and labeled. The first went to the compliance department at the bank, addressed to their head of risk. The second I sent to the state real estate board, where Evan's license would be hard to defend once they saw the time-stamped photos. The third I placed in the hands of a longtime client of mine, a collector who also happened to sit on the board of the same bank. I didn't need noise or shouting. I needed the right eyes on the right evidence. By noon, confirmation emails began to arrive. The bank had escalated the matter. The board acknowledged receipt. I knew the wheels had started to turn. When institutions see their own rules being bent, they move quickly, not out of morality, but out of fear for their reputation. That fear was now aimed directly at Cheryl and Evan. And I had lit the match in the safest room possible. I invited everyone to dinner, presenting it as a chance to revisit the mortgage discussion calmly. Linda set the table. Though she knew this meal would not end in peace, Mike arrived first, still carrying the weight of disappointment, while Jessica followed with forced cheer. A few minutes later, Evan appeared, dressed sharp as ever, and Cheryl joined with her polished smile. They thought this was business. They didn't realize it was court. Once we sat down, I placed a thick envelope in the center of the table. The room quieted. I opened it slowly, sliding out the papers one by one. First, Cheryl's own words about projected income, captured verbatim and transcribed. Then, Evan's smiling face caught in my photos, handing Jessica a glass of wine during that so-called private showing. Finally, the credit card bills, the hotel receipts. The exact dates aligned with open house schedules. Mike's fork slipped from his hand. Jessica went pale, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edge of her chair. Evan tried to protest, his voice rising, but the photos spoke louder than any denial. Cheryl muttered something about misunderstanding, but Linda cut her short with a glare that silenced the table. I said nothing for a long moment, letting the evidence rest where everyone could see it. The truth needed no speech. This wasn't about opinion anymore. It was about proof. And proof has a way of stripping people bare, leaving them with nothing but the consequences they tried so hard to avoid. The silence after I laid out the evidence didn't last long. Cheryl's phone buzzed first. She glanced down, her expression tightening as she read the email. The bank had already suspended her pending review. Her polita veneer cracked, and for the first time that night, she looked small, cornered by her own shortcuts. Evan's turn came next. I slid another page across the table. This one from the state real estate board. An investigation had been opened, and his license was frozen until he could defend himself. His jaw clenched, but his swagger was gone. Without his charm and access, he was just another man exposed for what he was. Jessica's collapse was quieter, but heavier. The receipts, the photos, the timing, there was no space for excuses. Her affair was laid bare in front of her husband, in front of me, and worst of all, in front of Linda, who had defended her for far too long. Mike sat frozen, his face drained, finally seeing what I had suspected for weeks. The dream house was gone. The leverage they thought they had vanished with the evidence. All that remained was the wreckage of lies and the cold reality of consequences. For Cheryl, for Evan, and for Jessica, the fallout had arrived in public view, and there was no covering it back up. After the dinner, I pulled Mike aside. His face was heavy, but there was something new in his eyes: acceptance. For the first time, he wasn't pushing back. He was listening. I told him straight I would never co-sign his debt, but I was willing to co-plan his future, if he was ready to do the work. We sat down at the kitchen table the next day. Just the two of us, with a legal pad between us. I drew 3 columns: expenses, income, and goals. Together, we listed every subscription, every delivery, every dollar slipping through cracks. Then we mapped out what he could earn if he picked up more sound jobs on weekends. I offered him part-time work at my shop, restoring cars with me, paid by the job, not by charity. Linda joined quietly, suggesting limits they could both live with. She wasn't forgiving Jessica, but she wasn't abandoning Mike either. It wasn't about punishment now. It was about building something he could stand on without anyone else's signature. The plan wasn't glamorous. It meant cutting luxuries, saving slowly, proving discipline over time. But I saw Mike nod. Not with pride, but with determination. For the first time, he understood. Responsibility isn't a burden you hand to someone else. It's a weight you learn to carry yourself. A week later, I called Mike back to the table where we had drawn the columns. This time, I had a single sheet of paper folded in half. He sat across from me, his shoulders straighter than before, ready to hear whatever I had to say. I told him I was not signing on his loan and never would, but I was willing to sign something else. I unfolded the page and slid it toward him. It was simple, written in plain words. If Mike could hold to the plan we created for 6 months, every expense tracked, every savings goal met, I would match whatever he had put aside and add it to his down payment fund. It wasn't a bailout. It was a reward for discipline. His eyes widened, not with the relief of someone being rescued, but with the fire of someone being challenged. Linda placed her hand on his shoulder, steady but firm. This wasn't charity. It was investment. I leaned back, raising my bandaged finger, half healed, half stiff. I told him this was the only contract I was willing to co-sign, the one written in effort, accountability, and time. In the weeks that followed, the dust finally settled. Though the marks it left were permanent, Cheryl's suspension became official. The bank announced an internal review, and her career was effectively over. The smile she had worn so easily at that desk would not return in another branch. Evan faced his reckoning too. The real estate board froze his license, and the investigation uncovered not just my evidence but other complaints that had been buried. The man who had walked into my dining room smooth and confident left with his reputation in tatters. A name whispered in warning, not respect. Jessica moved out quietly. There were no speeches, no attempts to defend what had already been exposed. She signed the separation papers, agreed to counseling, and lost her foothold in our home. Whatever dream she had clung to, it was gone. Mike bore the pain, but he bore it awake this time, no longer blind to the truth. As for Mike, he kept his end of the plan. He cut back, picked up extra work, and showed me he could live within discipline rather than debt. And Linda and I found peace again at our table. The kind that comes not from avoiding conflict but from facing it head-on. I raised my healed finger one night and joked that it could still ache in the rain. But I reminded Mike, it would never ache from someone else's signature again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.